Well, thank you, Katerina. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a good colleague and a good friend. And we're honored to have the opportunity to host here at Bay Atlantic University this very important international event. My name is Paolo von Schirach. I serve as president of the Global Policy Institute, and I'm also professor of political science and international relations at Bay Atlantic University, both of them located in this building. For whatever it's worth, historically, this hasn't got much to do with the lobbying, but it has to do with communication. This building used to be the world headquarters of United Press International, UPI, when it was still something. So, but again, historic memory. So, a couple of words about who we are and what we do. The Bay Atlantic University is a private nonprofit institution. We are focused on two growing fundamental areas and others to follow. One is the social sciences. I teach political science, but we also have business administration, economics and finance. We have a very strong MBA program at this university, which I believe it's one of the largest, ranking very high in terms of number of students enrolled in the Washington region. We also have a very, very strong program in, let's say, IT, broadly. That's not my area, so I look at them with respect and awe because I don't understand much of it, but as I'm sure all of you know, that it's extremely important, and it's a growing area. So we have many undergraduate degrees, we've got graduate degrees, and also joint degrees between the people can get a data science and MBA program, joint degrees, etc. So this is a fascinating and a growing field. I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody here that this is indeed the case. And also we have now, developing international agreements with other universities, so for exchange of students, etc. So we're small because we're young. So last year we celebrated our 10th anniversary. So we're licensed here to operate in the District of Columbia, and for whatever it's worth, which for us is worth a lot because many people here put an enormous amount of effort. We are accredited by NECHE, which is the New England Commission for Higher Education, which accredits all the universities in the Northeast of the United States, including Harvard and MIT and Boston College and Amherst and what have you. So it's the same accreditor, which for us is a point of pride. So, and as I said, we're growing. We have an enormous amount of foreign students. I think we have at least 40 nationalities represented. I see some of our students right here who are glad to see, who come from different countries. And so this is a good thing for us to be able to work with so many different students and nationalities. And by the way, our faculty is also very international. We have professors who come from different parts of the world, from Africa, from Asia, from different. So it's an interesting, very, very international cosmopolitan environment which enriches the life here. The Global Policy Institute, which I direct, it's separate from, but connected to Bay Atlantic University, and we are a research outfit, focusing on many different areas: economic policies, U.S. politics, international security, energy, education, and more. And very recently, I'm kind of happy to announce we started a GPI chapter in India, which means we will be focusing with our new Indian partners obviously on the enormous array of bilateral issues that may exist between India and the United States, but as I'm sure this may not be news to any of you, Indo-Pacific security, because clearly a lot is going on in the region, and the United States is a member of the Quad with the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. So there's a lot going on there. I won't bore you with the details, but this is what's happening, and then we have other new exciting initiatives on global energy issues, both fossil fuels and renewables, etc., and on and on. All our activities are open to the public, so anybody can join us, whether it's in person or online. Everybody does that. It's Zoom calls. I'm sure you've been to enough of those, but hopefully some more will not bore you. Before we get into the meat of this event, I just was going to make a couple of notations. A disclaimer: I am not an expert in this area of lobbying and government relations, or well, actually here mostly government relations. But just a couple of notations, which may be well known to everybody, but I thought it might be nice to reconnect with them. The United States Constitution is completely silent on any of this. The United States Constitution doesn't talk about political parties at all. Doesn't talk about lobbying, doesn't talk about interest groups, doesn't talk about anything. However, the First Amendment, talks about freedom of speech, right? And freedom of assembly, freedom of association, which creates a very broad understanding that all these are legitimate activities. And also, petition for redress, okay? The right to petition is where lobbying kind of finds its own, constitutional legitimacy. So I'm sure this is known to everybody, and I'm sure everybody knows the story of how we start talking about lobbying, because at some point in the 19th century, people who wanted to carry favors or ask for something from the president would sit in the lobby, would sit in the lobby, and they were asking for stuff. So who are those people? All these people are the lobbyists. And why are they there? Because they want stuff, more or less. I don't know. Some people say, oh, that's not true, that's a legend, but let's accept it that maybe it's true. And so that's the origin of the term lobbyist. I would just make a couple of very general observations, if I may, because as I said, I'm not a practitioner here. But certainly everybody who is in this business knows that in Washington there has been a complete explosion of the number of entities, individuals involved in public affairs, advocacy, lobbying, government relations, etc. We started really in the 1990s. Now, there's a lot, some people say, oh, that's a good thing because people have a voice and can speak and do things. And others say, this is terrible. We have balkanized America. Everybody is trying to get a piece of something, and it's everybody against everybody else. I'll leave that to the practitioners. I don't have an opinion here. I'm not knowledgeable enough to say that. But everybody knows that somebody's advocacy for something which they think is absolutely legitimate and important and it should be done, for somebody else is, oh, this is just special interests. People who are trying to get some stuff from the federal government. I mean, there are people who say, oh, green energy, I just give off the top of my head example. Green energy is really bad stuff. It's a waste of money. It's just, politically motivated. It doesn't work. It wastes money. But ethanol, oh, that's good. And I'm a Republican, and I'm speaking from Kansas, and ethanol is really good because it provides an alternative to imported fuels. Guess what? Kansas has corn growers, And what do they want? Set-asides to make sure that they continue to produce corn, because you make ethanol with corn. This is just one example, but anybody could figure out something else, and from the other side, what if I'm a Democrat, I want to protect this and that. I want to protect, the teachers' union, And others say, oh, the teachers' union are really bad because they don't do enough to improve student performance and they only take care of themselves, etc., etc. We could have millions of different examples. Another one that comes to mind is, why do we have the most expensive sugar in the United States? Because there are tariffs against imported sugar. How did that come about? Because somebody had to say there was a good idea to protect the sugar growers in America, and therefore that's an important thing. Somehow sugar is strategic for the United States, and on and on. What I'm trying to say is that somebody's proper advocacy for a particular sector for somebody else is just yet another special interest that is eating away at the foundation of America. The last point, which is pretty self-evident, the United States federal budget, some of you probably know, is how much? How much money do we spend every year? the federal government, the total budget.
6 trillion.
6.8. That's an enormous amount of money. $6.8 trillion. And that means money that is spent on regular operations, including, doing the normal stuff, paying salaries and this and that and the other, the light and heating and air conditioning in buildings and vehicles and fuel. I believe the Pentagon is the largest consumer of energy in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So that goes there. But then there's money that is doled out by the government for this or that or the other. And if I have some interest in a particular sector, whether it's pharmaceutical or medical equipment or whatever, or automobiles, or I say, how do I take some of that? Or if I'm not taking money, how do I get special treatment? How do I get special taxation? That if there's something that affects that, or can I get an exemption, please? Can I do that? And so I'm going to go talk to the congressman, to the senator, to people who write legislation. I mean, you know all this. It's become, for me, looking from the outside, an extremely complicated picture. But again, I leave it to the practitioners to decide how they navigate this or not. So it's an important topic because it exists. Lobbying, I don't know how many registered lobbyists there are in Washington right now, but as I said, I know for sure that the number exploded from the 1990s to today, and that's what's going on. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. Sometimes politicians say, oh my God, Washington is horrible, too many interest groups. I'm bombarded every day from people who say, you senator, congressman, oh, listen to me, you got to do this, you got to do that. And that's probably the work of many people here. And I'm sure that everybody who's advocating for or against something has good reasons for doing that. To say, well, this is really important. We should be doing this or not doing that. Anyway, you know all this, and I'm just making some general considerations. So I think now, without further ado, let's start with the first panel, and I would like everybody who's in the first panel to join me here. Okay, so we get started. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you. And so, I don't know, well, everybody has got the information about the speakers, so I don't know if I should, read maybe very quickly. These are very distinguished professionals, so I think to do justice to them, we should at least tell you who they are. Forgive me if I mispronounce this. Adeoye?
Yes.
That's you? All right. Owolewa.
Yeah.
Nigerian-American politician who was elected as a shadow representative of the United States House of Representatives from the District of Columbia. Representative Owolewa lobbies for Washington, D.C., statehood, universal health care, immigration reform, and income equality. As you know, we don't have official representation. That's a long story which goes back to the beginning of Washington, D.C., but it's important to have somebody who at least presents the district's interests in the U.S. Congress. Carolina Rankovic, Hubert Humphrey Fellow under the Fulbright Program, represents Serbia. She specializes in diplomacy with a focus on energy, climate, and ESG issues. With over 10 years of experience as an attorney at law, Ms. Rankovic has provided executive-level advisory services to business. Since 2023, she has served as the president of the Sofinatas Association and has worked as a human rights trainer on European Commission-supported projects. Dana Keene is an executive search consultant with the world's leading talent solutions firm, Korn Ferry. I'm sure everybody's heard that name. She's a key member of the Global Government Affairs and Nonprofit Practices. She works closely with prominent corporations, membership associations, and other nonprofit organizations at local, national, and international levels. Dinah specializes in the recruitment of a diversity of CEOs and senior level executives across sectors. Her recent CEO recruitment include BioAHIP, World Central Kitchen, the Miami-Dade Beacon Council, Beer Institute, and Interaction. She has also completed searches for chief policy leaders for the Association of American Medical Colleges and AdvaMed. Maritza, is you? Oh, that's you. Maritza Adonis, JD. MCIARB. I don't know what that is, but will you explain it? Is a renowned citizen diplomat, government affairs and corporate social responsibility executive, and a leading expert in business diplomacy and political thought. As the CEO of MTA Vision's global CSR and government relations firm, Maritza advises corporations, trade associations, and cities on a wide range of areas, including ESG, global public-private partnerships, public policy, rule of law, and economic diplomacy. She plays a pivotal role in amplifying her clients' interests within the U.S. Congress, executive branch agencies, and the White House. Jim Carter, right here to my left, is a principal and policy director with Navigators Global, helping corporate, trade association, foreign affairs, and nonprofit clients navigate Washington's complex policy, which, as we all know, it's very easy, right? I don't know what you do in the afternoon. Washington complex policy, regulatory and political landscape, and producing results. He's also a senior fellow with the America First Policy Institute's Center for American Prosperity. Previously, as director, he oversaw the center's operations, including research and policy development impacting economic growth, and tax and budget policy, regulation, trade, and labor productivity. For nearly a decade, Jim was vice president of government affairs at Emerson, a diversified global manufacturing and technology company based in St. Louis, Missouri. Lisi Docanto is a seasoned public affairs and communications executive and political and public policy expert with a distinguished career spanning government, business, and civil society. He's the founder and president of the award-winning global public affairs and strategic communications firm, the Docanto Group. He also is a senior executive at Gray Global Advisors, a global strategy advisory and public affairs firm founded by the late Congressman William H. Gray, a key figure in ending apartheid in South Africa through his authorship of the 1986 anti-apartheid law. And Pascal Chan, I think, who is joining us online, at least from this script because it's not here, leads the Canadian Chamber's work on a range of issues with a focus on supply chains and housing. Born and raised in Canada's capital, he has worked at various federal governmental departments prior to embarking on a career as a lobbyist. Pascal's professional path has spanned various national association and multinational corporations with extensive experience in the areas of housing, energy, and life sciences. He has also helped organizations in need through his volunteer work with the Canadian Advocacy Network. As you can see, there's a pretty spectacular array of talent here. Lots of people with the varying backgrounds, but all of them with deep experience from their different angles in this area of advocacy, government relations, lobbying, and whatnot from different perspectives. So here I got my guidelines, which I'm going to follow scrupulously. We're going to talk about the foundations of government relations and focusing on the dialogue between business and government, which is really what we're talking about over here. And when you say business, it has to be understood very broadly. It's not just corporations. It can be many different entities, and I'm sure our speakers will provide examples. So here, a question for all participants. What is the key difference between government relations, GR, and lobbying? Probably it's tricky. Are they distinct stages of the same process or totally different fields? Government relations, lobbying. So why don't we start, we go around, well, let's start with the lady. Okay. Okay.
So
you
shall
can,
I use this?
See if that,
Yeah.
you can use that.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to see all of you today here. I will bring perspective from Europe, and I'll make comparison between how does government relations between businesses work in Europe versus here in the US, bringing my experience in this field. So I would say that US could work better. I would say works better than Europe in this sense, and this is because US follows its legislation. So whatever is set, the companies should follow this legislation, especially if we talk about the energy field, energy industry. So what we can see here today is that companies and businesses, they follow these regulations strictly. While in Europe, we have some decline right now in terms of energy and mining and different projects trying to take over the lead in these sectors. So we can see that European Union even is trying to step on its own regulation. And here I talk about CRMA regulation, which relates to mining. And with this regulation, we can see that some other legislations brought in last 10 years regarding ESG, all this set of laws leading to ESG is undermined in order to get all of these energy projects, which is questionable for several reasons. So now if we talk about these relations, I wrote a paper relating to companies and made comparison between business strategy and business diplomacy. That eventually what we had so far, in a way, in terms how companies work, how businesses are developing their activities, is that they follow certain rules of business strategy. So now, as time changed and we have different values to bring on the surface, we have to say that companies should change their strategies, and this should lead more towards business diplomacy. And in my paper, I took example of Tesla and Elon Musk in terms how they try to approach different countries with different regulations, with different legal systems, and to succeed all of these. Although using today extracting lithium is quite a controversial topic, and it's a big question. Does it really help to fight climate change? So here I just mentioned the aspect of business. So businesses definitely should come up with different solutions and to follow the human rights rules that we set in terms business versus human rights, and how to operate in a way to harm human rights in terms of clean air, clean soil, water, etc., to not to destroy it in a way it's been destroying so far. So this leads to these topics. And then from the other side, we have governments, which should be, what is the government? It's people, right? I mean, it should be. Government usually needs to follow the needs of the people and to protect their rights. But what we have so far is that sometimes we have disruption in different governments. I can discuss on European governments and how they actually making deals undermine these values that we set in order to fight climate change, in order to improve air and other things. And also how, and I will finish with this, how basically we now can hear a lot of comments on the U.S. stepping out from Paris Agreement. But if you look closely into the Paris Agreement and China's actions related to their duties conducted by joining the Paris Agreement, is that they actually spread the harm over other continents, because China was asked to decrease the level of pollution they have in China, and other countries thought that they will shut down their factories, but no, they just moved it out, and now it's spread in Europe, in Southeastern Europe, in Africa, and also in South America, everywhere. So these are all questions to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I am advised that we should give the floor now to two of our colleagues online, because they have time pressures. So Duvi, is Duvi with us? So please, the floor is yours. We understand you've got some time pressure, so please go ahead.
So first of all, thank you, Katya, and everyone for organizing this in the university. It's a true honor to be here today with you all, and my close friend from the congressman from the District of Columbia. We all work closely together. Number one is really advocacy and relationships, and reflecting on, whether it's the climate or different areas. I really, feel that working daily with all the administrations and different governments and chairing World Trade Week on behalf of the United States of America, I want to invite everyone. It's going to be on May 22nd, World Trade Week, New York City, with Katya, with to share information with you. We have a very broad understanding and really in public relations that really have outcomes. Having said that, the United States of America and President Donald Trump's leadership, refocusing the strength of commerce to be able to balance the influence, what America's strength is, the leading world leader in the world of commerce. Is the president's first focus coming into office is saying, we're going to use our strength to be able to leverage policy relations, and bring the world together, bring peace in different, whether it's in Ukraine and Russia, whether it's in Israel, or whether it's in different areas, whether having, European government continent really own up to paying their share to protect their continent, because it doesn't make sense the United States of America has to fit the bill for Europe when all the governments over there and all the countries over there are under threat, and they're protected with the loans they're giving or the assistance they're giving. In America, just giving free money, it's not even trackable. So the first thing to have a healthy relationship is to have open dialogue. I applaud President Trump for taking that stand. I know the world went into like a shock a bit, but it's working. Once America gains its respect back on the world, in the world platform, and shows it's producing, and shows that we are here on a two-way street. We're not just here to be stepped on. We're not going to just support the green initiatives of the world, but we're going to focus on today's challenges of saving lives, of bringing peace. We're going to focus on bringing the world together and making the public relations really reestablishing them. Yes, calling out Canada. Think about it. Canada spends $8 billion a year on defense. The United States of America spends $1 trillion on defense. Is that a fair leverage? Who is Canada relying on for defense? The United States government. We have to call it out. No one even spelled that out before. So if we don't put the cards on the table, and people just hear, oh, Trump is trying to give the tariffs for Canada, trying this. No, this is a two-way street. You cannot have a healthy relationship. You cannot have a healthy marriage without confronting the white elephant in the room. And no one has ever done that before. So I think the president's setting a tone to be able to use his public relations in the next stage to be able to reposition the world and then get everyone's attention and wake up everyone. And that's the way we could bring peace. Because if we don't identify that Ukraine, for example, got.
It's okay. We can hear you.
Yeah, I just lost you. So, for example, with Ukraine and Russia, right? Let's analyze the situation. What the president's position is, and this is all based on understanding political science. We all know that Putin said that if Ukraine backs out of trying to enter NATO, he won't attack. I was shocked that the Biden administration kept on pushing him to enter NATO. Now let's ask ourselves, let's say he was eligible to enter NATO, right? And he would have forfeit. Okay. So Biden at least was trying to build him in. 4 years later, close to 4 years later, NATO has not embraced Ukraine. Obviously, they don't meet the qualifications to enter NATO. So let's ask ourselves now. So was President Trump right by saying, you know, this war could have been avoided? These lives could have been saved, not justifying Putin's position, if God forbid, for spilling blood and starting a war, but from a political science perspective, we all have to look backwards and take inventory. And it's just so painful to see all the blood that was spilled because it could have been avoided if Biden wouldn't have instigated Zelensky to try to fight to enter NATO, because Putin said, we all know it, it's in the news, you could backtrack and see it, just remove your request for NATO and I won't invade. So this could have been avoided. And that's why President Trump feels that Zelensky is obligated to do concessions. You know what? You went into a war, you weren't positioned. And by the way, let's ask all our European friends and all European governments who came out condemning the president after the meeting in the White House and the Oval Office about Trump, how they confronted Zelensky. Let's ask them all, like, where are they? I want to see the dollars they're writing. I want to see the support they're giving Zelensky now. I want to see them stepping up to the plate. I want to see what they are doing now to support Ukraine. And at the same time, why aren't they inviting them into NATO if they stand for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to our next speaker joining us remotely, Mr. Pascal Chen. Pascal, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
This is Duvi Maritza, right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
The
Good
floor
afternoon.
is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As our moderator stated, my name is Maritza Donis, and I serve as an advisor for corporations as it relates to ESG and economic diplomacy. But my other role is as an adjunct professor, so I also teach international affairs and business. So in class, when I'm presenting what is government relations and what is lobbying, I tend to draw a Venn diagram. So in that circle on the left side, I'll have government relations, which is the process of entering into advocacy, ensuring that we can maintain mutual relationships and relationship building and reputation for that respective company. And on the right side, I have lobbying, which lobbying is actually the action steps that you're taking to influence public policy. Usually it's tied to a specific legislation. In the middle, I kind of changed my Venn diagram a little bit, and that's where I put the government relations professional. Because as GRPs, our role is to help our clients, in this case here, businesses, understand the importance of managing the government affairs aspect and advising them on when it's proper to actually enter into a lobbying engagement. So essentially, government affairs is the process and lobbying is the action item. And you heard both of my colleagues gave you really great examples of government affairs gone wrong, right? So my first colleague gave an example about how there's not enough lobbying as it pertains to the EU. And my second colleague brought in a more comprehensive overview of what it looks like for multinationals and governments to maintain that relationship. Because in that case here, as you mentioned, with the transition in governments, we're seeing a backlash, so to speak. But a lot of it has to do with us as government relations professionals not really taking our stance, making sure that we're having forums like this. So thank you, Katerina and Valentina, for hosting this so that we can exchange best practices. We can advise each other on what are some developing opportunities and issues in our countries so that in turn we can advise President Trump, Congress, and our respective regulatory bodies, both domestically and abroad. So big takeaway, government affairs is the process and lobbying is the actual action that you're taking in order to influence the legislator or the legislation.
Wonderful, thank you. Good, obviously, I envy her students. Good teacher, okay, who can explain things in a short fashion, but very clearly. Thank you so much. Okay, why don't we move on with Mr. DeCanto. So,
Yes.
same question.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the hosts for convening such an important conversation here in a timely manner, just a few blocks away from the popularized term of lobbying in the Willard Hotel, and just blocks away, of course, from Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. I've been a lobbyist for the last 25 years. I've been in Washington for the last 30 plus years. I spent a great deal of time working on this issue. And has been explained.
Sorry, can everybody hear the back? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would describe lobbying and government affairs or government relations in this way. The art of government affairs and government relations is a symphony. You're using lots of different instruments in order to influence the conditions that exist within the landscape, whether it's at the federal, state, or local levels. Whether that's through reputation management, advocacy, insights, research, and a myriad of ways. And then the art of lobbying is one of those instruments within that symphony, particularly focused, as my colleague said, on influencing legislation, regulatory process, and so on. This is an environment, as we all know, that's highly ambiguous, highly uncertain, highly volatile, and the professionals in the field of government affairs, government relations, operate in this environment. I can say, I suppose, because they've been here a long time in Washington, that the town is littered with so-called government affairs professionals and lobbyists, but very few of those are actually, I think, very successful and skilled at what they do. In part because I think in this profession, like in our personal lives, it's always better to listen twice as much as you speak. You can always learn more, as Mark Twain said. And I think when you're engaging in the work of influencing on behalf of a government or behalf of an entity or nonprofits, which is what I have been doing across all of these areas and advising governments and Fortune 500s and others, is to understand intuitively what you're being asked to do, and then how to deploy the constellation of instruments to influence that. And there are some who specialize in these different areas, and while there's others who don't. But it's a privilege to be on a panel with such distinguished government affairs professionals here that provide that unique perspective. And I'm looking forward if we can get into some of the other aspects of the conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go in all the way
you.
around. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, is it
Carry
on? Can everyone hear me? Thank you first and foremost to the hosts, to the panel members, to everybody here. I am sitting among wonderful experts. Again, my name is Dana Keene. I am an executive recruiter on behalf of Korn Ferry. So I recruit government relations of executives, lobbyists. So I will be bringing you the recruiting lens. How I think about government relations really comes down to the client who I might be working with. So for example, government relations strategy, government relations can look very different in the nonprofit sector for a 501c3 organization, whereas government relations for a lobbying association or a 501c4 organization can look very different because the regulations are different depending on where the organization sits and how their budget works, how the organization is set up. So government relations, in my mind, starts with the organization itself, how they're set up, how they navigate funding, where they get funding from, and government relations can look very different depending on the sector, depending on the industry, depending on the budget. So government relations, in my mind, is very much more the strategic, how we engage government entities, policymakers, how we might influence them, how we build coalitions, and partner with other organizations who have similar needs. So government relations, in my mind, is much more the broad term, the umbrella term, the strategic thinking for how to execute some of the shorter term or components within government relations, like lobbying or advocacy, that fall under the government relations umbrella. I hope that may or may not be clear, but I'm going to go with my 3-minute limit.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I first want to thank Katarina, the host, Bay Atlantic University, and my distinguished panelists for being here. My name is Dr. Adeoye Owolewa. I'm the U.S. representative of Washington, D.C., which is a really interesting area because it's like a city, it's a municipality, non-state, but sometimes we have state-like functions. And in a way, without congressional vote, I am a lobbyist as well. Me, looking at a lot of my colleagues who are in office, many of them are attorneys, children of other politicians that became elected officials, and very few of them are experts in a wide range of fields. In addition to being the representative, I'm also a pharmacist, and I'm DC's only elected healthcare worker. So the reason why government relations are so important is because when you see the DC Pharmacy Association, the Medical Society of DC, when you see people like the physical therapists of DC, creating those relationships with governmental elected officials are critical, because when a question comes up, we need someone to talk to. And that's critically important because sometimes legislation looks good on paper, but doesn't carry out the way we want it to in real life. So people on this panel really make things happen. Lobbying sometimes is a dirty word because people assume it takes a lot of money, but oftentimes it takes a lot of people and energy behind it. For example, in DC, we recently had the House of Representatives pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open to avoid a shutdown, but reverted DC back to fiscal 2024 levels, which is $1 billion less than what we projected in 2025. And our budget year began in October. So we've already started spending money, expecting to have a higher amount of money. And when that happened, DC residents rose up, talking about teachers, talking about students, parents. They all stormed the Senate building, and all those people engaged in lobbying. Not a dollar cent was spent. And because of that energy, because of senators literally seeing DC residents that they'd never seen before, they didn't think would care, they actually passed a budget fix in the Senate, and now we're going to do the same thing in the House. So the importance of government relations cannot be understated, and the importance of civic lobbying cannot be understated, because that's how we're able to see legislation fix the problems in this country.
Thank you. Well, last but not least, to my
thank you very much. Thank you for having me and us here today. I've been in DC now for 34 years, and I've encountered lobbying in every step of my time in this town. I worked for 4 different senators. I served in 2 administrations, both the Clinton and Bush administrations, as an appointee. Headed the DC office of a Fortune 500 company for about a decade, and now work for a multi-client lobbying shop. And at every step of the process, I can say that lobbying is really nothing more than educating. It's providing information to, if there's a member of Congress or a policymaker, you want to say, okay, here's a problem we've identified, you should know about it. Or if there's something that the member or the policymaker wants to do, you can say, well, if you do that, here's what happens. This is the impact it may have on people in your district, your state. And I'll say this, as a lobbyist, you must tell the truth or you lose credibility, okay? And I go one step further. I try to say, here is the impact. And by the way, here is what the folks on the other side of the aisle are going to say. And then I would try to provide pushback on those arguments. So ultimately, it's an education. And a good lobbyist uses the tools throughout the government relations ecosystem. I mean, They might start a political action committee. They might work through a trade association. They might have a relationship with a think tank, grassroots groups. These are all useful tools to try to, again, achieve a better outcome by educating.
Well, I think if there is a best practices committee in the whatever, I'm just imagining, if there's a lobbyist association, you should be the chair. Because I am sure you admit to that this is your standard, but not everybody necessarily follows it. And people will say, oh, Senator, you should really do this. And by the way, there are a lot of people that I can talk to who may not vote for you if you don't do this. I'm sure I'm not saying anything particularly revealing, right? Oh my God, really? Does that happen? Yes, it does. Okay. So, but I appreciate your high standards. And as you say, at best, education. Yeah, really should be an education and be fair and tell you how it is. But I doubt that your colleagues in the industry, all of them, operate according to this high ethical standards. But I hope they do. But if not, they should follow you. Anyway, let's move on. And because we don't want to take too much time here, we have a very big panel. So I'm kindly asking all the participants to be as short as possible within reason. So these are pointed questions to Adeoye. We just spoke about it, but the more pointed question for you is, you've been a strong advocate for DC statehood and issues like universal health care and income equality. Given the challenges of lobbying for these causes in the current political climate, what strategies have you found most effective in building bipartisan support and driving legislative change? Piece of cake. This is so easy.
Absolutely. No, well, in terms of the fight for DC statehood, a lot of people understand that it's a big political partisan issue. However, when you go outside the district and outside the Beltway, you realize the fight for DC statehood is also an awareness issue. There's people living in California and Texas and Utah that have no idea, not only are we not a state, that there's people in DC that are not government workers, Congress members, or White House staff. So filling those information gaps is very critical.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't know it was really working. But in terms of building bipartisan support, not only for DC statehood, but beyond issues, one example I like to give is about a few years ago, I went into, I believe, the House chambers of someone from Nebraska or so. And I spoke to the chief of staff. And I talked to him about Yellowstone and federal parks in his state and asked him about how does it feel to have federal control over some of your area. And he talked about how it was terrible, how he gets calls all the time where he can't fix anything, and how it's just a huge ordeal that areas in his state and in his district are federal controlled outside of his jurisdiction. And I immediately relayed that to DC, living under congressional oppression, to be honest. And when you appeal to people's emotions and find commonality first, then you can get to the details. If you just try to shoot numbers at people and tell them why they're being terrible to you, then sometimes you get that immediate pushback. So just find the commonality between people, regardless of what you look like or where you're from, or even your political party, is able to really reduce those barriers.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you. I think the next one is for you, Carolina. So differences between government relations and lobbying in the United States compared to Europe, based on your experience on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, thank you. So I took this example within the energy industry because this is my focus is here on energy industry. So if we compare the US and EU, there is this very good example that regarding the project in Nevada, mining project that showed that would disrupt the land and soil of Native Americans. So the project was stopped. And this is a very good example showing that US really sticks to its legislation. And here I don't refer to any specific administration, but this is the system. So I mentioned previous CRMA and this regulation of European Commission within European Union that tends to disrupt all of these criteria that we set. Especially 2 days ago, European Commission had session regarding the strategic energy projects within EU. So here we see huge huge problems that may occur if we start these projects that are planned in Romania, in another Balkan countries, and not only European Union, but also candidate states. So this is the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're moving right along to Dana. So what is advocacy or public lobbying? I guess you already have, maybe you want to elaborate. We began our discussion noting that GR is often commissioned by business and business association. So how does advocacy or public lobbying differ from traditional government relations?
Thank you. I think about advocacy and public lobbying as components of a larger government relations strategy. So advocacy, in my mind, is the broadest. In the broadest sense, you're mobilizing, you are engaging partners, you're raising awareness. Whereas lobbying is a little bit more pointed. You are speaking more directly to specific governmental constituents to educate, again, like my colleagues shared, to educate them about what it is that your organization wants to or hopes to achieve. And so those are kind of key differences in my mind between lobbying specifically and advocacy. Anything that I didn't cover there?
Pretty good.
All right.
So Maritza, you're next. In your work advising corporations and governments on ESG, public-private partnerships, and economic diplomacy, what do you see as the biggest challenge in aligning corporate social responsibility initiatives with government policies, and how can stakeholders work together to create more impactful and sustainable outcomes? Another easy thing.
Thank you so much. So in my work, when I'm advising corporations or cities or chambers, I'm wearing 2 hats. I'm wearing my hat as a government relations professional, but I'm also wearing my hat as an international business attorney. So the MCIR is essentially a designation that qualifies me to resolve economic disputes between corporations and countries. And so in my case, when I started my consulting practice, I wanted to merge both the industries of corporate social responsibility and government affairs, because in my role and as an international arbitrator, I saw that those 2 respective business units were always at odds. And so when I would write their respective their awards, I usually am asking the business to return back, $200 million back to this particular country, but it was not earmarked to, let's say, the environment or to education or to a social sector. And so when I went into the consulting field, I decided to then bridge that gap for corporations. And so what I'm doing is a lot of education. So I'm lobbying inside of the corporation to make the case as to why they should integrate sustainability, corporate social responsibility initiatives within their practices. And then on the external side, as a government relations professional, I am then ensuring that I'm maintaining relationships with the respective legislators, regulatory bodies, to ensure the corporation or city or chamber that I'm representing, when it's time for their particular industry to be on the agenda as relates to regulation or maybe to introduce a policy, I can then ensure that their interests are protected. And so oftentimes, and my colleague mentioned it, sometimes when we're thinking about lobbyists, there's a negative connotation to it, and we often think in order to have that impact, we need to have a lot of money. But a lot of times, what I'll do for my chambers especially is encourage them to actually create trade association groups or to find an alignment or movement table. And essentially what we do is, I always tell my clients, you can have one corporation with 20 lobbyists. They're not going to be as effective or have more impact than 20 organizations aligning with one lobbyist for their cause. And that's because in corporate social responsibility, it's very data centric. It's you responding to the marketplace, the consumers. To translate that back to government affairs, the consumers in the marketplace are the constituents of the elected officials. So oftentimes, and my colleague mentioned it earlier, it's not an issue of finding alignment necessarily, but it's education. It's educating the regulators on what is corporate social responsibility so that we don't fall into politicizing ESG, for example. Because we're seeing the trends, we've studied, what employers are looking for, what employees are looking for. We're seeing that consumers would much rather spend additional $20 with a company that is quote unquote socially responsible. And so my job is to educate the regulators. What is ESG and how does it impact my respective company? And on the other end, it's to encourage my companies to be strategic in how they incorporate ESG. So it is not a popular feedback when I'm providing it, but sometimes corporations will say, should I respond to this particular issue? And oftentimes I'll say no, just because it's buzzing on social media. It may very well be a very important issue that may cross diplomatic engagements, but does it meet your mission and goals? So I always remind corporations, and then this is me placing my business attorney hat, what was your purpose for beyond profits? What are the values of your employees? What are the priorities of your shareholders? And if that aligns with that particular social issue, then it's okay for you to respond. So a lot of it is one, making sure I can help the corporation even understand what is corporate social responsibility, and then help them to maintain compliance with government affairs. And then once I cross over, it's educating the regulators on what is the role of my respective clients' industry and how can we find that mutual balance on ensuring that government is also not overregulating corporations, but that corporations can also do what is good as it's defined by their stakeholders, which is, the shareholders, employees, consumers in the marketplace.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving right along to my left here, Jim. Let's discuss the lobbying system in the United States. In your opinion, which aspects of this system require reform? Could you provide examples of use of successful communication between business sectors and association in the US that you consider most effective?
Well, in politics, they say you should answer the question you want to answer, not the one that was asked. So guess what? That's what I'm going to do. Rather than look at like legal reforms, I think there are certain best practices that lobbyists themselves can do that actually make for much more effective lobbying. First of all, as a lobbyist, I focus every day on trying to demonstrate value. What can I do today to prove to my client or my company that we're here and we're getting things done? Sometimes that's not always easy. You look for ways, but you can't. But in order to do that, there are two other things one must do. One is listen. I find that going to Capitol Hill is the easy part of the job. The hardest part, at least when I was with my previous company, was figuring out and finding out what they really thought was important so I could focus on that. So I would call the vice president for tax at my company and say, what keeps you up at night? Okay, that keeps me up at night now. Thank you. And then in addition to the listening, building relationships, that's key. The worst thing you can do as a lobbyist is simply show up when you want something. It's like, okay, why is Carter here now? What's he want today? But no, again, I haven't worked on Capitol Hill, I haven't worked in 2 administrations. I know the demands that are being placed on these people. And if I can be a resource and help them achieve their ends, and in the process, educate them on, on my clients' issues, that's win-win, because they'll want me in the room, and I'll be in the room when it counts. So being a resource, building those relationships, listening, and demonstrating value.
Okay, well, that's very good. Last, and again, not least, Lucy, with your extensive experience in both business and politics, which industries are currently the most active in funding lobbying efforts in the United States? Is there a noticeable difference in this activity between the current and previous administrations?
Thank you. First, I want to echo what Jim said. I think those are spot on comments, and having worked in both the Senate and the House in the last 6 administrations closely, I wish more of us did exactly what you've done, what you said. So maybe you're right. He should be the chair. To answer your question, all industries are active, but in general, and it was shown in the opening slides, there's about 6 of those that, regardless who's in the White House or who's in Congress, are constantly spending money, and the shift in attention focus. And you saw that if you remember, pharma and the electronic manufacturing folks, and insurance as well, both on the mutual life side and also on the Blue Cross side, on both sides. You got securities and investments, you got oil and gas, and then you have the I'll describe as the real estate folks. Generally, those top 6 are making a disproportionate amount of money, spending the money in lobbying, regardless of what's happening. Now, that fluctuates from administration to administration, depending on, in general, 3 different factors. 1, the political dynamics; 2, the policy priorities; and 3, the regulatory landscape. Those 3 things, among other factors, tend to shift the intensity and focus of the lobbying effort. So, for example, in the Biden administration, big focus on clean energy. The big focus in the Trump second administration is on oil and gas. Doesn't mean that one stops funding and the others start spending more. They adjust for that. And if you look at the top companies that spent last year in lobbying expenditures, the number 1 company was the realtors. That was driven by crisis within the housing industry and things brought on, I think, by them. And then second is the neighbor up the street from the university, the U.S. Chamber. And third was the American Health Hospital Association. And so that's in general how the pressures get impacted. But you saw what the numbers were, or are, I should say, on lobbying. This isn't a number that's going to get smaller. It's a number that's going to continue to get larger. It doesn't mean that, as my colleague said, the more you spend, the more influence and the more effective you are. I think that's the mistake in lobbying, based on the best practices that you've heard here, that it's less about how you are deploying the money, but how you are engaging with professionals who understand the rhythm dynamic of the environment in which they're in, and have what I would describe as the Chinese proverb is, if you want to know what your destination is, talk to people who are coming back from it. All of us here have come back from where many organizations, in regardless of sector or industry, are, to help them navigate that path forward. And I think that makes the most successful government relations advocate or lobbyist, if you will. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I guess, I don't know if we have more time now, because we've got quite a bit ahead. So I believe this concludes this panel. I want to thank all the panelists for giving us their best shot at very complicated topics. Again, I repeat what I said earlier. With a $6.8 trillion budget, particularly we're mentioning now healthcare. For whatever it's worth, the United States has the highest healthcare spending in the world, 18% of GDP, which is an astronomical number. Results are not that great with all that expenditure. Maybe with your efforts, it can be streamlined and made more cost effective. Just a wish. But anyway, with that, I want to thank all the panelists, and I think we're moving on to the next panel. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.